Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? I can hear me echoing. Good afternoon. Welcome again. My name is Carolyn Sorkin, and I'm here to talk to you today about something that is probably a little bit less complicated than what Charles presented. My head is still reeling from the extent of the information we were provided. I want to talk today about something that might be on a different aspect of the work that you all do, that we all do, and that is essays for students who have had a particular challenge. Just to begin, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My background is in education. My undergraduate degree is in history. And when I graduated from college, having been a tour guide, I took a job as an admission officer at Brown University. After that, I did a master's degree in educational administration and policy analysis, worked at universities in a couple of places, and ended up at NYU, where I did a PhD in education and taught there for a little while in the School of Education before taking a job at Wesleyan University, where I was for about 11 years. And these were all terrific jobs, but none of them really gave me the opportunity to work one-on-one with students, which I thought would be a meaningful way to do things. A bit of a luxury, I think, compared to the work that some of you do, to be able to work one-on-one with students. About 12 years ago, I opened my business, University Passport, and one of the first things I did was go to a presentation at Conard High School in West Hartford about financial aid and financial planning given by our host, Charles. And he and I have been working together since then. It was very lovely to see, I don't know where he is now, but to see Logan again. Logan and I work together. So today, I want to talk to you about this particular kind of essay because I think it's something where we as counselors, I should say I'm an independent educational consultant at this point. I'm not a school-based counselor, but I think people in both your positions and mine are often in the situation of having to advise students about indiscretions, challenges, and so on. And so I want to talk a little bit about how to make that as effective a process as possible. And so we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by the explanatory essay. I want to also have some discussion about who reads that essay, because it might be different people or more people than you might imagine. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose of that essay, and then I want to give you 6 simple rules to help you advise students on how to write a compelling explanatory essay, and then of course I'll be here for questions afterward. So again, this is a little bit of my background. We've sort of already gone through that. One thing I can say is that having been in the field of education and specifically admission as an applicant 3 times, as an admission officer, as a consultant, and as a parent, I feel like I have a lot to give students and families who feel a little overwhelmed by the amount of information that's available. And so when I talk to students and families, a lot of the time I spend is really oriented around things that are specific to the individual student. So sometimes what's specific to an individual student is a problem. The problem might be academic performance. The problem might be disciplinary or behavioral. The problem might be something that's out of the student's hands or very much in the student's hands. So there are a lot of different ways that we come to this explanatory essay. Is it optional? Some schools require it. If your school, if the school to which your student is applying asks outright, have you ever been suspended? And if your student has been suspended, the obvious and honest answer is yes. Not all schools ask that question, and so then I think there's a conversation pending with, I think school counselors have to determine in the context of their school community whether the information has to be shared in some other way, usually through the guidance counselor letter or some other letter from the school. But I would argue that oftentimes it's in the student's best interest in any case to explain what's happened and how they've dealt with it. This is partly because you don't want the admission officers reading the application to jump to conclusions about what might have led to that grade drop or that break in your school career. It may be because the student's essays talk about something that needs to be explained also from a separate standpoint, different kind of essay, and so on. There are usually more people involved in the essay than, this is not, let me say this, it is the student's purpose to write this essay, it's the student's job. But students need counseling and advice. School counselors, I think, often come into play here. Teachers may come into play if it was a classroom-based issue. I'm working with a student this year who just stopped turning in assignments, and so we needed his teachers to explain what had happened in the classroom that led to the grade drop that we're looking at. Parents generally will be involved. Parents generally will be very concerned, but they may or may not be involved in the actual writing, but I think that they are appreciative of guidance from us on how to speak to the issues in a way that the readers can understand and hear. And then, of course, admission officers are reading these letters, and you might think that admission officers are the only people at the institution or institutions in question who are reading these letters, but that's not true. Admission officers are tasked, as you know, with putting together the best class. And the best class is determined in a lot of different ways. And there are a lot of different stakeholders in determining that. But in addition to the professors and the coaches and the folks who deal with financial aid and the folks who deal with families that come in at the other end of the financial spectrum, there are other people involved in the process. There may be other students involved depending on what kind of an incident we're talking about. The principal of a school, or if it's a private institution, the headmaster may well want to be involved. The main thing I would want to say is, I should just mention, if it's a test-based thing, ETS or ACT might be involved. If there's a medical issue, perhaps you need a doctor to explain from his or her standpoint what's been happening. But what I really want to focus on is the university officials that you might not foresee being ready to participate. Those can be the dean of students, public safety, residence life, Title IX officials, and my favorite, general counsel. Their job is not to pick the best possible class. Their job is to protect the university from any kind of risk. And so they're looking at this with different eyes than you might, and I might, and the students might, and the parents and teachers and so on might. So one thing you can do in talking to students, in helping them understand how to approach this essay, is to help them think about imagining a debate with the different stakeholders that I've mentioned, and to think about how to present their case in a way that provides material, like sort of winning arguments for friendlier readers, and let's say ways to disarm people who might be a little bit more uncomfortable with whatever has happened. To do that, rather than writing an essay, I often recommend that the students start by just telling a story about what happened. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that pretty much all stories have a beginning, middle, and end, although we may not tell a story in that order. The beginning in this case is the issue at hand, a dying parent and a huge drop in academic performance as a result of that, or a student who shows up drunk at prom, or I'm sure you all have many examples of ways that this can play out. This first part is the fact section. This is the blow by blow, this is what happened piece of it. The middle of the story would show how the student is learning, growing from the experience, and maybe what they've done to rectify the situation, to atone, it's a little bit of a religious word, but to make up for what they've done. And then the end is really, I would say, extremely important and sometimes forgotten, and that is to talk about specific, tangible steps they have taken and or will take to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So this can be difficult, but I think it's really important for students to include all 3 sections there so that the incident can be understood. Some things that you shouldn't write, a lot of students want to say, you know, yeah, I did this, but it was so-and-so's fault. They made me do it, they goaded me, they inspired me, they deserved it. Anything like that does not go in the essay. And the other thing is, I would recommend that you not go too far into the weeds. People need to know what happened, but you don't want to end up with sort of a gossipy story, he said, she said, and so on. Simple, direct, honest, and concise is really important. Admission officers tend to have 6 to 8 minutes to read an application. You know, students spend hours and hours and hours working on their applications. Admission officers have huge stacks, and so they don't have a lot of time, and because of that, I think it's really in the best interest of the student to keep their story as straightforward and honest as possible. We've talked about things to focus on, what you learned through this experience, how you made amends, and how you changed. So 6 rules. I want to talk about them a little bit one by one. The essay is not about the problem. The essay is about the recovery. So while you do have to explain, and it may take you a while to explain exactly what happened, the focus really needs to be on what you've learned from it, and you need to kind of show, I'm hesitant to say this, I don't think students should be gaming the system in any way or making light of it, but they do need to show how they've learned, how they've grown, how they've absorbed what they've done and changed their ways. And of course that means they need to have actually had that transformation. So it's not something to be glib about, but I think it's really helpful for families to have a school counselor who can sit down with a student and explain, you know, you need to understand what this meant to you, why this was something you did, and how are we going to know that you're not going to do that again? How have you processed the incident? Number 2, the student has to find something to write about that was their fault. And that's kind of hard for some students who want to point that finger that I was talking about before. If everybody's in agreement about what happened, it's pretty easy. You know, it could be fighting, substance abuse, theft. It could be a case of a student having some mental health issues. In those cases, it probably isn't going to be such a difficult story to tell. And really, it should be followed by some version of, I'm sorry, this won't happen again, and I hope you'll give me another chance. Other cases are a little more complicated. We see cases of sexual misconduct, academic dishonesty, bullying, and those sometimes are not straightforward stories. So in cases like that, students sort of have to walk a tightrope. They don't want to say they did something that they feel they didn't do, but they also don't want to go around deflecting blame onto someone else, either another student, the school, or anyone else, by saying that they didn't do anything wrong. So the solution really is to focus on what piece of it the student did do wrong. I should have thought before I acted. I should have talked to X and so person, and so on. And that, I think, is relevant because these students are going to show up at a university, and the university needs to understand that this is not a risk they're taking, that, you know, a repeat incident is not a risk they're taking by bringing this student in. So the power of the essay isn't really driven by acknowledgement of what the student didn't do but should have. They really can't argue that they can prevent the specific problem from happening again because they're not going to be in that specific situation. What they can do is recognize what part they played in it and kind of assert that they've learned from the mistake and are looking to make amends. Number 3, you just never say, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's not right. You never say, you never say, I'm sorry, but. What you say is, I'm sorry, and. And I think that's really important because they need to provide context, but erases the power of the apology. I'm sorry, but sounds like the next words are going to be, it really wasn't my fault. You really can't hold me responsible for it. And that, like I said, erases the power of the apology, kind of makes it null and void. I'm sorry, and gives the student a chance to say, and here's what I'm going to do about it to make sure that I don't do it again, to make sure that the injured parties are made whole, and so on. Rule number 4, and this is a little bit, maybe a little bit strange. Pity is something we can give, but it's not really something we can ask for. So if a reader feels sorry for the student, that's fine. Maybe it's even better than fine in some cases, but if the student says, poor me, it's going to diminish, it's going to undercut what they're saying. So I would suggest that your students strive for a neutral tone in telling their story, and let the facts make the case for them. Rule number 5, without repeating other parts of the application, make sure that this essay is part of a coherent whole. You don't want to be telling this fabulous story about a student, a set of stories in the application about this fabulous student who's captain of whatever team and very involved in student government and a really upstanding member of society, and then have something that just doesn't fit with that. So the story needs to take into account the wonderful things they've done, as well as this lapse in judgment, or in the case of something like an illness in the family, an extenuating circumstance where maybe they didn't make the best choices after the, in the aftermath of the initial diagnosis or situation. And finally, I would recommend that you bear in mind that it's still an essay. It's still an application essay. Students have to write it well. It's going to be read, it's going to be evaluated. In some cases, it's going to be scrutinized, and it has to hold the reader's attention. Like I said before, admission officers are reading really quickly. And where they can jump to shorthand, sometimes they do. So if they see that there's been a suspension, an expulsion, a drop in grades, you may have to help them be curious to look for why that's the case, what happened, and what was done about it. How did the student make reparations? So it's, in some ways you could say maybe it's easy to do that. The kinds of things that students are involved in that lead to the need for this kind of an essay are, sort of, at least some of them are sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is interesting to a lot of people, but it's important, again, to stick to something that's concise, that's well organized, and that's written in natural language. So that's something that clearly was written by the student, not by the parent for the student, not by anybody else, but the person who is responsible for whatever piece of this issue they can be responsible for. As counselors, one of our most important tasks is to teach students that they don't need to give up after making a bad choice. Lots of people make bad choices. We want to teach them that less than perfect academic or disciplinary history doesn't mean the end of their college career if they're heading to college, or their career if they're heading straight out into the professional world. In fact, it isn't usually the last page of the story. Many people recover and recover well. Our job is to help them do that in a thoughtful, meaningful way that helps them get to the point on their path that they're trying to reach. Thank you. Questions? Comments?
Yeah.
Yes?
When a student is writing perhaps about some mental health issues that may have impacted their grades or something along the course of the time, how much, from the admissions, from when you were an admissions officer reading that, how much is too much?
That's a really,
it's a struggle for me with where's the line, right? And often they want to put everything out there.
I think sometimes I actually recommend that my students write an essay where they put everything out there and then they set it aside and write another essay, because they often need to tell their story. And I think that's an appropriate thing to do, but not necessarily an appropriate thing to share. You're very right about that. I think in the case of students who have a mental health issue or a physical health issue in many cases, or something else that's led them to have a drop in grades, admission officers need to understand generally what has happened and what you've done about it. They don't need all the details. You may want to mention a diagnosis, but you don't have to. You can say, I've been struggling with some mental health issues, and here's what I've done about it. So that's usually a better way to go. And part of that is also that 6 to 8 minute thing that I was talking about. Admission officers don't have a lot of time, and so you want to make sure that they give their attention to the pieces that are key. Sure. Other questions? Yes?
In your time in admissions, what percentage would you say of these types of letters did you grant admission on?
I never thought about it in terms of a percentage. We really took them on a case-by-case basis. A lot of them were youthful indiscretions or, health problems and things like that that were mostly beyond the student's control, and the student maybe didn't make the best choice about how to handle something that was brought upon them, not brought by them. There were not a lot of cases where we said this is sufficient to deny the student admission if the student were otherwise somebody that we were planning to admit. But what I would say is that we often found that it fit with other concerns we might have. Not always, but sometimes. There was a time that an alumnus got back to me to tell me that a student for which he had written a really glowing write-up from an interview. The alumnus wanted to send us a cutting from the local newspaper about how the student had brought a bomb to school, maybe not the best choice. And the student had a terrific interview and a glowing write-up. But when we looked back at letters of recommendation from teachers and the school counselor, there wasn't anything about that, because it had happened after the application had gone in, but there were some indications that maybe there were issues. And so, yeah, that can come up as well. Admission officers don't know everything. If they have questions, they should be picking up the phone and calling you. And often I think they do, but again, 6 to 8 minutes. So you want to make sure that everything is right there in front of them so they don't have to go seeking for it if it's not necessary. Did you have a question?
Related to that, after working in the same school, we are not allowed to disclose if a student was suspended. We observe school policy prevents us on the school.
Is that true across the board?
Yeah, we do.
So
interesting.
Some of what you're talking about is a little sticky for us.
Yes.
And none of us can necessarily police how the student answers. If they ask, I say be honest, of course.
Yep.
But for some of these more extreme ones, such as even if the bomb episode happened before I wrote my letter of recommendation, I'm not putting that in my letter of recommendation. I would probably be fired if I did that.
Got it.
So there have been a handful of cases over the years where I have picked up the phone instead of more off the
Said I'm concerned about XYZ.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
But from what I understand, school counselors are also a little busy, and it's hard to find the time to pick up the phone every time that.
for sure, but if I'm concerned enough.
Yes, no, of course.
Everybody in this room would
Yeah. But
at least, but everybody's so worried about our higher.
that's a really good point. That's a really good point. In talking with students, I think one thing that can be helpful is helping them understand that this is a learning process for them, that it's an opportunity for them to reflect,
And that's our approach anyway.
Yeah.
Regardless of college, right? Like
Yeah.
mistakes and sort of on the other side of it in terms of oversharing, I think our general advice is.
So maybe this is also a presentation we should be having with legal counsel and with superintendents.
Legal counsel is going to.
That's true. But I think they need to hear that this is a legitimate concern. In some cases, it's a legitimate concern, and the school may need to know if.
Legal counsel should be concerned that maybe we're sending dangerous kids to campuses too. So.
Yes, but they may be more concerned about a lawsuit. So, other questions, comments? All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your meal, and thank you very much.